Beamy Cora, 28. Creative lead at a decent marketing agency. I thought I had it all figured out. My life was curated, my opinions were correct, and my purpose was clear: to navigate the world and point out its flaws, especially the male ones. My boyfriend was Reese. He owned a small business, making custom furniture by hand. He was quiet, patient, and good with his hands. A bit simple, maybe. I saw him as a project, a good man who just needed his ingrained patriarchal notions gently corrected by a loving, enlightened partner. My job was my battlefield. The creative department was a mix of men and women, but the men, of course, carried that unconscious bias. My main challenge was Donovan. He was the senior designer, technically brilliant, but he had this energy, that confident, assertive male energy that just takes up all the space in a room. I made it my mission to manage that energy. A few months ago, maybe late spring, we landed a huge client, a beverage company looking for a total rebrand. This was my chance to shine, to lead a major campaign from the ground up. We were all in the main conference room for the initial brainstorming session. The air was buzzing. People were excited. I laid out the brief, setting the tone. I talked about inclusivity, breaking norms, moving beyond the traditional male gaze in advertising. Donovan was sketching furiously on his tablet. When I opened the floor for ideas, his hand shot up first. He stood up, connected his tablet to the main screen, and launched into a pitch. It was objectively good. Bold visuals, a strong tagline, a very clever interactive component. You could see the excitement ripple through the junior staff. He was passionate, articulate, and completely commanding the room. And that's when I felt it, that familiar prickle of annoyance. He wasn't collaborating, he was dominating. When he finished, there was a moment of impressed silence. I let it hang in the air for a second before I spoke. I smiled a patient, slightly tired smile. "Thank you, Donovan. That was a lot of energy." I paused for effect. While I appreciate the passion, we need to be mindful of not engaging in creative aggression. We want a collaborative space, not a stage for one person to overwhelm the conversation. You could have heard a pin drop. The excitement in the room just vanished. Donovan's face, which had been bright and animated, went completely blank. He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He just quietly disconnected his tablet, sat down, and said nothing. The rest of the meeting was like pulling teeth. No one else wanted to volunteer an idea. I ended up sketching out a much safer, more corporate concept. Everyone just nodded along. Walking out of that room, I felt a sense of victory. I had successfully managed a display of male dominance and re-established a safe, collaborative environment. That evening, I told Reese about it over dinner. He listened quietly while stirring his pasta. I explained how Donovan tried to steamroll the meeting, how I had to gently but firmly put him in his place to protect the team dynamic. Reese looked up from his plate. He asked if Donovan's idea was any good. I was a bit taken aback. That wasn't the point. "It's not about whether the idea was good," I explained. "It's about the toxic way he presented it. It's the principle of the thing." Reese just nodded slowly and went back to his food. He didn't get it, but that was okay. He would, eventually. A week or so later, he came home from his workshop looking really pleased with himself. He was holding a small, beautifully crafted wooden box. The wood was dark and polished, with intricate carvings on the lid. He told me it was for me. He'd been working on it in his spare time. He explained the type of wood, the complexity of the joints, how he'd finished it with natural oils. I took it from him. It was heavy, solid, a very masculine object. I analyzed it. Man takes tree. Man uses tools and forced to shape it into something he finds beautiful. Man presents it as a gift. It was a textbook example of the masculine impulse to conquer and control the natural world. I smiled at him. "It's very sturdy," I said, "a classic manifestation of the subconscious male drive to create order from chaos. But the gesture is sweet. Thank you." The light in his eyes just went out. He had been smiling, proud. Now his face was just tired. He mumbled something like, "You're welcome," and went to wash up. Later that night, I posted a picture of the box on my social media. The caption was something clever about deconstructing male gift-giving rituals and the patriarchy hidden in everyday objects. It got a ton of engagement. All my friends were commenting, "You're so insightful," and "OMG, this is so true." I felt seen, validated. The final straw with Reese happened on a random weeknight. He was making dinner, and I was on the couch, scrolling through my phone after a long day at work. He was cooking some complicated recipe, moving between the counter and the stove. At one point, he asked me if I'd seen where he put the smoked paprika. I sighed dramatically. "You know," I began, putting my phone down, "this is a perfect example of the mental load. I'm not the keeper of the spice rack, Reese. The expectation that women should automatically know where everything is. In the domestic sphere is a remnant of patriarchal household structures." I was just getting warmed up, ready to launch into a full educational monologue. But Reese didn't respond. He just stood there for a moment, spatula in hand. Then he did something I didn't expect. He calmly turned off the stove. The sizzle from the pan died down. He took off the apron he was wearing, folded it neatly, and placed it on the counter. He walked out of the kitchen, past the couch where I sat with my mouth still open, and went into our bedroom. I was confused. Was he having a moment? A minute later, he came out with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He walked straight to the front door. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He didn't even look at me. He just paused, took his keys out of his pocket, slid the apartment key off the ring, and placed it on the small table by the door. Then he opened the door and left, closing it softly behind him. The silence in the apartment was deafening. For a few seconds, I was just frozen. I couldn't process what had just happened. Then the anger hit me, a pure, hot wave of it. How dare he? How dare he just walk out in the middle of a constructive conversation? This was classic male emotional cowardice. Unable to handle being challenged, he just shut down and ran away. I grabbed my phone and fired off a series of texts, telling him how manipulative his silent treatment was, how this was a textbook example of gaslighting, accusing him of being too fragile to be with a strong, intelligent woman. The messages all delivered, but no reply came. After an hour, I tried calling him. It went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Voicemail. I opened our message thread to send another angry paragraph. The little check marks next to my messages were gone. The text bubble was a different color. He had blocked me. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. This wasn't part of the script. He was supposed to come back, apologize, and be ready to learn from his mistakes. I spent the rest of the night alternating between fury and a strange, hollow anxiety. I tried to frame it in my mind as a positive, a liberation. I posted a vague story online about not shrinking yourself to accommodate a man's fragile ego. My followers ate it up. "You're better off without him, Queen." His loss. The validation helped, but the silence in the apartment felt wrong. The next day at work, I was a wreck. I was irritable and distracted. The big client project was heading into its most critical phase, and I needed my team to be flawless. We had a check-in meeting that morning. I was sharp, demanding, and I could feel the tension in the room. I asked Donovan for a status update on the visual assets. He looked up from his laptop, his expression completely neutral. He gave a concise, factual report. No passion, No extra ideas. No, what if we tried this? It was just the bare minimum. When he finished, I pushed him for more. Is that it, Donovan? No creative input? No new angles? We're not just assembling parts here. He met my gaze. There was no defiance, no anger. There was nothing. He just said, I'm executing the plan as approved. Is there a change to the directive? I was floored. He was using my own corporate jargon against me. I looked around the table. The other two men on the team had the same flat expression. The women looked uncomfortable. Something had shifted. The dynamic I had so carefully constructed was breaking down. The next few weeks were hell. At home, the quiet was oppressive. I started to notice all the little things Reese used to do. The coffee was always made when I woke up. The plants were always watered. That wobbly shelf in the closet was suddenly very wobbly again. I tried to get a hold of his family, his friends. No one would give me a straight answer about where he was. His brother, who I'd always tried to educate during family dinners, was particularly cold. I called him, demanding to know what Reese had told him. He was quiet for a moment. Then he just said, he told me he was tired of being a disappointment just for being himself. Then he told me not to call again and hung up. The audacity. They were all enabling his toxic avoidance behavior. Meanwhile, work was becoming a nightmare. The men on my team had formed a sort of silent pact. They did exactly what they were told, no more, no less. They arrived on time. They left on time. They never offered an unsolicited idea. If I asked for their opinion in a meeting, they would just say things like, whatever you think is best, Cora, or sounds good. My collaborative space had become an echo chamber of my own voice. The creativity was gone, the energy was dead. The project, which was supposed to be my triumph, was becoming a bland, soulless, corporate monstrosity. I was doing everything myself, directing every detail, writing copy, adjusting layouts because no one else would take any initiative. I was working 14-hour days, fueled by caffeine and rage. I tried to confront Donovan about it. I caught him in the kitchen one afternoon. I asked him why he'd stopped contributing, why he was letting the project fail. I expected him to get defensive, to argue. I was ready for a fight. But he just looked at me, his eyes calm, and said, I'm just trying to avoid any more creative aggression. I'm following your leadership. And then he walked away. There was no way to fight that. He wasn't being insubordinate. He was being maliciously compliant. They all were. They had figured it out. The only power I had was in their reaction. Their arguments, their defensiveness, their mansplaining. That's what I fed on. When they stopped providing it, I was left with nothing. I was a general with an army that would only march in place. The first client check-in was a disaster. The client was a pragmatic, no-nonsense businessman in his 50s. He didn't care about our internal politics. He cared about sales. I presented our progress, trying to spin the bland designs as clean and universally appealing. He wasn't buying it. He looked through the mock-ups with a frown, his silence more damning than any criticism. Finally, he looked up, not at me, but at the team. He pointed at a design Donovan had clearly executed, but not invented. Who came up with this? He asked. I opened my mouth to say it was a team effort, but Donovan spoke first. Cora's vision, he said, his voice completely flat. The client's eyes flickered to me. Cora, he said, his tone dangerously calm, this isn't what we discussed. This has no soul. It looks like it was designed by a committee that's afraid of its own shadow. I started to give him my corporate spiel about brand safety and reaching a wider demographic. He held up a hand to stop me. Save it. I'm paying this agency a fortune for cutting-edge creative, not for this beige wallpaper. You have 2 weeks to show me something that doesn't put me to sleep, or we're pulling the contract. He stood up and walked out of the room without another word. The silence he left behind was thick with failure. My failure. Everyone was looking at me, not with sympathy, but with a kind of detached curiosity, like watching a car crash in slow motion. That night, I went home to the empty apartment, and for the first time, I didn't feel angry. I just felt scared. My carefully constructed world was cracking at the seams. The men in my life had discovered a new weapon against me: silence. They'd just stopped listening. And I was starting to realize that without their attention, their arguments, their reactions, I didn't know who I was. I needed a distraction, something to make me feel powerful and desirable again. I decided to go to the gym. The gym was a place I usually avoided, full of grunting men and clanging weights, a temple of toxic masculinity. But it was also where Zane worked. Zane was a personal trainer, the stereotypical handsome, muscular guy, the kind of man I'd built my entire ideology against, the kind of man I wrote scathing social media posts about, decrying the patriarchal beauty standards he represented, and the kind of man I secretly found incredibly attractive. It was a hypocrisy I never admitted, even to myself. I put on my best workout clothes and went. The gym was busy. I saw Zane across the room, training a client. He was laughing, effortlessly charming. I started a workout routine on some machines nearby, making sure I was in his line of sight. I thought maybe a little harmless flirting would be a good ego boost, a reminder that I still had power. After a while, his client finished and left. This was my chance. I walked over, pretending to be interested in a machine near him. I made eye contact and smiled. "Busy night," I said, trying to sound casual. He gave me a brief, polite nod, a flicker of recognition, but nothing more. "It is," he said, and then immediately turned his attention to wiping down his equipment. He wasn't being rude. He was just indifferent. I was just another person in the gym. I stood there for a moment, feeling incredibly foolish. He finished his task, grabbed his water bottle, and walked right past me to talk to someone else without a second glance. I was invisible. The man who embodied everything I claimed to hate didn't even register my existence. The rejection, as subtle as it was, felt like a physical blow. I left the gym feeling smaller and more alone than ever before. The validation I was seeking wasn't there. No one was listening. No one was reacting. No one was even looking. The 2-week deadline at work was approaching like a freight train. My desperation grew. I tried everything to get my team to engage. I tried being the cool boss, bringing in donuts and talking about our lives outside of work. They ate the donuts and gave me one-word answers. I tried being the tyrant, setting impossible deadlines and demanding perfection. They just worked silently and delivered exactly what I asked for, no more. The project was still dead on arrival, a monument to my failed leadership. The day of the final presentation, I felt sick to my stomach. I knew what was coming. We all gathered in the conference room. The client and my boss were there. I went through the motions, presenting the barely improved designs. The client sat through it with a stony expression. When I was done, he didn't even comment on the work. He just looked at my boss and said, "We're done here. I'll have my legal team contact you about terminating the contract." Then he stood up and left. My boss, a man who usually never showed emotion, looked at me with pure, unadulterated disappointment. "Cora," he said, his voice quiet but heavy. "My office. Now." I walked behind my boss to his office. The walk down the hall felt a mile long. Every head in the open plan office turned to watch us. No one was even pretending to work. He closed the door behind us. The silence in his office was heavy. He sat down behind his big desk and just looked at me for what felt like an eternity. He wasn't angry. He was just tired. "This was our biggest client, Cora," he started, his voice flat. "Losing them is a massive blow. I opened my mouth to make excuses, to blame the team, to blame the client's lack of vision, but the words wouldn't come out. I had nothing left. He seemed to know it. I've been getting complaints, he continued, unofficial ones. People are afraid to speak up, but the message is clear. The morale in your department is at an all-time low. The creative spark is gone. He gestured vaguely towards the main office. Donovan came to me last week, not to complain, but to resign. My heart sank. Donovan was the backbone of the team. I talked him into staying, my boss said, at least for now. He told me he couldn't work in the environment you've created anymore. He said it was creatively hostile. He used my own words. He must have known. Cora, you're talented, he said, and for a moment I felt a flicker of hope. But your leadership style, it's destructive. You've alienated your best people. You've turned a team of innovators into a group of drones. He leaned forward, folding his hands on the desk. I can't afford to lose the rest of the team, so I have to let you go. The words hit me, but they felt distant, like they were happening to someone else, getting fired. It was something that happened to incompetent people, to failures, not to me. I was a leader. I was right. He explained the severance package, the logistics of returning my company property. I just nodded, unable to speak. He handed me a cardboard box from the corner of his office. You can pack up your desk, he said, his tone softening slightly. It's probably better to do it now, while most people are heading out for lunch. It was a small mercy, I guess. Walking back to my desk with that box in my hands was the ultimate walk of shame. I could feel every eye on me. I kept my head down, focusing on the task, tossing my personal mug, my notebooks, a framed photo of me and Reese from a happier time, into the box. It didn't take long. My professional life fit into a single, sad brown box. As I was finishing, Donovan walked over. I braced myself for a smug, I told you so look. But his expression was unreadable. I'm sorry it came to this, Cora, he said quietly. I looked up at him, confused. You're sorry? Nobody wanted this to happen, he said. We just want to do good work, that's all. He didn't sound accusatory. He just sounded sad. He turned and walked back to his desk without another word. That, more than anything, broke me. His pity was 1,000 times worse than his anger would have been. I picked up my box and walked out of the building, not looking back. I got home and dropped the box in the middle of the living room. The apartment was silent, darker than usual, as the afternoon sun wasn't as bright. For the first time in my adult life, I had nowhere to be, no one to manage, no one to correct. My phone was quiet. The work emails had stopped. My social media felt pointless. Who was I without my job title, without my mission? The next few days were a blur. I barely got out of bed. I ordered takeout and watched mindless TV. The silence of the apartment was no longer just quiet. It was a physical presence, pressing in on me. I started noticing how empty the space was without Reese's things. His worn armchair in the corner, his stack of woodworking magazines on the coffee table, his heavy boots by the door. The apartment didn't feel like my sanctuary anymore. It felt like a stage for a play where the other actor had gone home. One afternoon, probably a week after I was fired, I was mindlessly scrolling through my phone when I saw something that made my blood run cold. A friend of a friend had posted a photo from a local street fair. In the background, out of focus but unmistakable, was Reese. He was smiling, genuinely smiling, and he wasn't alone. He was with another woman. She wasn't a model or an activist. She looked normal, kind. She was laughing at something he'd said. I felt a surge of pure, primal jealousy. How could he move on so fast? Had he been seeing her all along? Was I just a fool? I went into a full-blown spiral. I stalked the social media profile of the person who posted the picture, trying to find out who she was. I found nothing. The rage came back, stronger than ever. It was the only thing that drowned out the hollow feeling in my chest. This was all their fault. Reese, for being too weak to handle me. Donovan, for his passive-aggressive mutiny. My boss, for choosing profits over principles. All these men colluding to tear down a strong woman. I decided I needed to confront Reese, to have the final word. I didn't have his new address, but I knew where his workshop was. The next morning, I drove there. It was in an industrial part of town I'd only been to once or twice. I parked across the street and just watched for a while. After about an hour, he came out to load some finished pieces into his truck. He looked different. He seemed calmer, more at ease. He'd lost that tense, perpetually braced look he'd had when he was with me. I got out of my car and walked over. He saw me coming. His body tensed up instantly. That familiar look was back. He stopped what he was doing and waited for me, his face a mask of weary resignation. "Cora," he said. It wasn't a question. "We need to talk," I said, my voice trembling with suppressed anger. "I don't think we do," he replied, turning back to his truck. "Who is she?" I demanded. "The woman from the street fair." He stopped and turned back to me, and for the first time, I saw a flash of real anger in his eyes. "That's none of your business," he said, his voice dangerously low. "We're not together anymore. You don't get to ask me those questions. After everything I did for you, I tried to make you a better person." He let out a short, bitter laugh. "Make me a better person? Cora, you didn't see me as a person. I was a project, a symbol. I was your living example of toxic masculinity that you could polish up and show off to your friends." Every word was a punch to the gut. "Everything I did was wrong," he continued, his voice rising. "My job was wrong. My hobbies were wrong. The way I talked, the way I thought, even the gifts I gave you were just more evidence for your thesis." He gestured around him, at his workshop, his truck. "This is me. This is what I do. And you were ashamed of it. You were ashamed of me." I tried to argue, to tell him he was twisting my words, that he just didn't understand, but he held up a hand to stop me. "No, no more. I'm done being your student. I'm done walking on eggshells. I'm just done." He looked me straight in the eye. "I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for, Cora, but it isn't me." He finished loading his truck, got in, and drove away without looking back. I just stood there on the sidewalk, in front of his workshop, completely and utterly defeated. He was right. All of it. He was right. The realization was so total and so devastating that I couldn't even cry. I had been so convinced of my own righteousness, my own intellectual superiority, that I never stopped to consider the damage I was doing. I didn't see him. I saw a concept. I didn't see Donovan. I saw a threat. I hadn't been building a better world. I had been building a prison around myself, and I was angry at everyone who wouldn't willingly step inside it with me. The drive home was a blur. I walked back into my silent apartment. The box of my office things was still in the middle of the floor. On the coffee table was the wooden box Reese had made for me. I picked it up. It felt different now. It wasn't a symbol of patriarchal control. It was just a box. A beautiful box made with skill and care by a man who had at one point loved me. A man I had driven away because I valued being right more than being happy. I opened the lid. It was empty. I sat down on the couch, holding the empty box in my lap, and I finally started to cry. Not with anger or self-pity, but with a deep, profound sense of loss. I had been the one screaming about toxicity, but I was the one who had poisoned everything I touched. My relationship, my career, my friendships, all ruined by my own hubris. The men in my life hadn't conspired to destroy my world. They had just quietly decided they didn't want to live in it anymore. They stopped listening, and in the deafening silence that followed, The only voice left to hear was my own, and I finally didn't like what it was saying. I don't know what happens next. I don't have a job. My savings won't last forever. I deactivated my social media accounts. There was nothing I wanted to say, and no one I wanted to impress. My world didn't just fall apart. I learned that it was never really there to begin with. It was a stage set, and when the actors walked off, there was nothing left but me, alone in the spotlight, with no lines to say. Maybe this is what rock bottom feels like. It's quiet, and it's lonely, and for the first time, I have no one to blame but myself.